Hey everybody, it's Mike, and if you've been following me here on my YouTube channel, checking out the videos that I've been putting up once a week, you know that besides DJ related topics and performance related topics, I also like to talk about music. I have a passion and an interest for music, as I'm sure you do too. I mean, if you're a DJ, it's your career, and the songs are kind of the building blocks that we use. And so today I wanted to talk about an album that I feel doesn't get enough credit as far as being influential and as you know, as far as the history of pop music over the last 50 years. And that is this album. It is the debut album from the Cars, 1978, what they call the eponymously, am I pronouncing that correctly? The eponymously titled, because it was titled after the Cars, album of 1978. So first thing you need to understand is music and kind of the zeitgeist of 1978. As far as pop music goes, disco is still huge. If you look at the charts in 1978, pretty much the Bee Gees and Andy Gibb and Taste of Honey and all these disco bands are still ruling the pop charts. As far as rock goes, you either are dealing with some soft rock stuff, or 1978 is the year that even the Rolling Stones, probably the greatest rock band of all time, puts out their disco song, and that's Miss You. So pop music heavily influenced by dance music and disco music. And in terms of punk music, which had really exploded onto the scene in 1976, so just 2 years earlier, punk music is already kind of phasing out or fizzling out or kind of coming to the end. I always think of the punk music as similar to a punk song. Fast, angry, in your face, but over in about 2.5 minutes. And that's really the way the punk music kind of exploded on the scene in 76 and 77. By 78, the Ramones and the Clash are really kind of drifting more towards a pop sound, and the Sex Pistols are done. They had put out the one album. They had a short tour in the States in early 78, and then they are on their way to disbanding. So that's where music is in 1978. And if you know much about music of the 1980s, so much of it becomes what they call new wave. They called it alternative back then too, but the word alternative has taken on a different meaning in terms of music, especially in the 90s. So new wave also can be referred to as post-punk or synth pop. And what that music is really capturing the anger and kind of the that energy of punk music, but producing it a little bit better and using synthesizers and some of the more modern technology. And I really think that this album spearheaded that and had a huge influence on that whole new wave sound. Now, it's not the only one. I'm not going to sit here and tell you the Cars were the only one. Certainly the Pretenders, certainly Blondie, Television, Talking Heads, these other bands were also kind of helping to reshape that punk sound into what we'll know as new wave. But this album, I think more than any other singular album, took that anger of punk and really kind of made it a little bit more commercial. Added that technology, which we'll see throughout all of the 80s. I really don't think there are any of these bands, Duran Duran, New Order, Depeche Mode, any of these bands would have existed without the influence of this album. One of the great things about this album is the opening 3 tracks. Opening 3 tracks of this album: Good Times Roll, My Best Friend's Girl, and Just What I Needed. You tell me another debut album by a band that has as solid of a 3 tracks. It's going to be hard to find. Those are 3 songs that still today are all over classic rock and 80s pop and all that. Those 3 songs are very recognizable and 3 huge hits for the Cars. One of the reasons why I think this album bridges classic rock, punk rock, and then basically is a forebearer of the 80s new wave is the hooks. You listen to the beginning of those 3 songs and you can tell the Cars were really writing music and writing songs that would hook their audience in, and very similar to even going back to Chuck Berry with some of his opening riffs. They knew how to write an opening hook and make it stick. this album, and I certainly was as a kid. I would listen to it all the way through, and I love those two last songs on the album, Moving and Stereo, and All Mixed Up. And if you know the album well enough, those two songs kind of mesh together. They kind of blend from one, or segue, to use our terminology, from one song into the next. And I used to love that. This is one of those albums that as a kid, I was just getting out of my Kiss phase and discovering that there were other bands other than those four guys with makeup. And this album, and News of the World by Queen, and the Knack's first album, and Bat Out of Hell. Those were some of the albums that I listened to in this time. I used to listen to them in my bedroom with the headphones on, and just put the needle on the record, listen to the entire first side, flip it over, needle on the record, and listen to the entire second side. I don't know if that's a lost art or not. I don't know how many people listen to albums all the way straight through. Certainly they don't put the needle on the record anymore, but I don't know if that's a lost art. But I certainly did appreciate this album from beginning to end as a kid. So as I said, I'm just giving some love to 1978, The Cars' debut album. I feel very influential in the terms of the whole history of pop music and rock music in the 1980s. I think without this album, a lot of that music doesn't exist, or it exists in a much different format than we know it. I'm actually very surprised when I read about music and what albums have been influential that this one isn't included more often on those lists. So kudos to The Cars, huge album. They went on to obviously a huge career, and I think this album had a lot to do with it.